Hey, Randy Roth here. By request, I'm making a video on the different resurrections. And so that's what we're going to do, is we're going to remove the confusion around some of the different resurrections that are out there. We'll start with the one spoken of in Revelations 20, verse 4 and 5. In this resurrection, we are told that the righteous are resurrected, and that the rest of the dead are not, the unrighteous, are not resurrected until the end of the 1,000-year reign. So we know that the resurrection, at this resurrection, only the righteous are resurrected. I bring about that point because in other resurrections, both are resurrected, and so we're going to look at that. Okay, so one of the things we notice here in this passage is that those who are martyred for not taking the mark of the beast are resurrected at this time. And it also calls it the first resurrection. Okay? So there is another resurrection that happened before this, but not before this was written by John, and the date is up for debate on when that was written. It doesn't matter to me on whether or not it was written in, prior to 70 AD or after 70 AD, because it doesn't mess with my doctrine as it does with preterists and other doctrines. So the other verse we're going to look at is Daniel 12, where it talks about a time, the worst time ever for Israel, known as the time of Jacob's trouble, that's talked about in Jeremiah 30 and 31. And Jesus talks about it in Matthew 24, this worst time ever. Joel talks about it in Joel 2. So this time also has a resurrection. And this one, in Daniel 12:2, tells us that both the righteous and unrighteous are resurrected at this time. So what's going on here? Here we have the first resurrection that is spoken of in Revelation, that only the righteous are resurrected. And if you're a pre-tribber, you believe that only the righteous are resurrected at the time of the resurrection of the dead, that you call the rapture, that Paul calls the resurrection of the dead in 1 Corinthians 15:42 through 54. So if the unrighteous are resurrected at this resurrection in Daniel 12:2, then what resurrection is that? Well, we're told of another resurrection that happened. It happened, and it's recorded in Matthew 27:53. And in this one, it says that the saints, many of the people on earth saw the saints resurrected. So what happened when Jesus died and was in the grave for 3 days? Well, it is a little obscure. I happen to believe that he went down to Sheol and released the dead at that time. Both the righteous and the unrighteous. The righteous were some of them were seen. The saints were seen on their way to heaven. The others, the unrighteous, were escorted to hell. That's my take on it, and I'd like to see some more documentation from the Word of God on that. But it is a little obscure. But here's the deal: if Daniel 12:2 tells us that this resurrection that happened, both the righteous and the unrighteous are resurrected, then it's talking about this resurrection as seen in Matthew 27. Okay, so that is one of the things that ties this Daniel 12 verse 2 to this particular resurrection. The other is, in Daniel 12:1 starts out by saying, at that time. What time was it? What was the time that caused the worst time ever for Israel. Well, Daniel 11 is so precisely historically accurate today that many of the atheist historians insist that this chapter was not written by Daniel, but sometime in the future, well after Alexander the Great. Because this chapter, it records, or prophesies rather, every single ruler from the fall of Nebuchadnezzar to the time of the Roman Empire, when the glorious land is taken over by the Roman Empire, but doesn't include Aden and Iman and well, there's three cities listed there. Is seen in verses 41 and 42, and so this chapter it shows Cleopatra, Alexander the Great, and many more. It shows the fellow I was rebuked for getting his name wrong not too long ago. I was thinking it was Artaxerxes, and it's another guy that I have a hard time pronouncing his name. But he was the one that sacrificed a pig on the altar of God in Jerusalem, and it is him that Daniel wrote of the abomination of desolation. And so when Jesus writes it, or speaks, and recorded in Matthew 24 by Matthew, that let the reader understand, the Jews totally understood exactly what Jesus was talking about. They understood that this abomination, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, was this dude that came in and sacrificed a pig on the altar of God in the temple, and required the Jews to worship this Greek god of Jupiter. That was short-lived, but nonetheless it did happen. And so the readers understood what Jesus was talking about. And this series of rulers that Daniel 11 talks about, it just goes on with every single ruler up until the time of the Roman Empire. And so when the glorious land was taken and occupied by Rome, it wasn't taken by Rome, it was taken by Alexander the Great, a Greek, later became the Rome, in which the Romans, in which those three cities, Aden and Iman, were not included. They were a little bit to the south, and they were not part of the Roman Empire. And so when it says it excluded those, it's talking about the Roman Empire. Okay, so when Daniel 12 comes around and says, at that time, that's the time it was talking about, the Roman Empire. And so the resurrection spoken of in Revelation and the resurrection spoken of in Daniel are two entirely different resurrections. And they are defined differently by who gets resurrected. Daniel shows that both the righteous and the unrighteous are resurrected. Revelation shows that only the righteous are resurrected at that time. At the first resurrection, the second resurrection is when the others become resurrected from the dead. So I hope that helps clear things up a little. I appreciate you watching. Thank you.